Swagatam, welcome. Today we're going to talk about how to sit without completely destroying your back. Also, we could call this the Tadasana of Sitting. So this is how to sit and maintain a healthy spine and hips. This is applying to everyday life, but also to yoga practice when we sit for meditation or pranayama, or even some seated postures that you may be doing. So I have my friend here, Michelangelo, to help us learn about the bones. So before we get started, I would just like to say something about the culture that we live in. We are sitting a lot. We sit in chairs, we sit in cars, we sit on the couch. We are doing a lot of sitting. And so knowing how to sit well is very important, but really what we need to know is that it's not so much the sitting, it's the staying there. So when we sit and stay and don't move, that is really what's causing our problems. And some of us have work where we are sitting for long periods, so integrating ways of moving while you're sitting or integrating ways of getting up and taking breaks regularly is going to totally save your back. So that's a really important thing to remember, is that it's not just the sitting, it's the staying there. And I tend to sit on the floor a lot. Anytime that I can do something seated on the floor as opposed to at my desk or at a table with a chair, I do. And when you sit on the floor, you tend to move more. You aren't as comfortable as you might be able to make yourself propped up in a chair. So the body just naturally wants to move more. And so finding ways to take your activities down to the floor is a really great thing. It also helps maintain the flexibility of our hips. So we're going to use Michelangelo here to help us with some of our bony alignment understanding. The first thing I want us to be familiar with is the pelvis. All right, so here's a hip bone, and you can see it comes down and curves around into a sitting bone, the ischial tuberosity. And when we're sitting, this is what we're sitting on. We are not sitting on our buttocks. We are sitting on these sitting bones, and what's attached to these sitting bones are our hamstrings. Right? So essentially you're sitting on the back of your thigh and your sitting bones. If you're sitting on your tailbone or the lower part of your sacrum, you're actually really trying to lay down. So you've placed your pelvis in a position of laying down. And this is, if you stay that way but still are upright, very damaging to the lumbar spine. So the lumbar spine, or the spinal column, is what we call a kinetic chain. So it's all connected, and when it moves, every other part is affected. So if you're moving one part of this kinetic chain, another part is going to move. So when we're sitting, if we set ourselves up well, we maintain the natural spinal curves. This has a lot, this affects our health in many ways: the health of our joints, the health of our discs, our ability to breathe well, maintaining the space of the front and back and sides of the body, as well as the energy flow and the blood supply to our brain. So it's really very important. Just this one simple thing affects a lot of things. Okay, so we're going to look at sitting on our sitting bones and how to make that happen. But another important thing to understand is that when our thighs move, our hips move. So if we bring our thigh bone up to a 90-degree angle or more, this guy doesn't do it because he's attached to a pole and he doesn't have ligaments and muscles. But when we do this in our live living bodies, the pelvis moves. Okay, so If I'm to bring my leg up higher than 90 degrees, my pelvis begins to tip back. And so the whole reason this is important to understand is that when we're sitting, having the thigh at about 120 degree angle to the pelvis, the torso, is optimal for being able to maintain the upright pelvis and therefore the natural curves of the spine. So we're going to look at that in a chair, and then I'm going to translate that into sitting on a support for meditation or pranayama. So when I sit on this typical chair that we find everywhere, they're all about the same size. Your dining room chairs, these folding chairs, there might be some slight differences, but they are all the same, and our human bodies are all different. So typically when we sit down in a chair, we kind of plop down and head back. So this is me actually wanting to lay down and letting the chair prop me up right for sitting. So my pelvis is tipped under. My pelvis and my legs, I'm ready for Shavasana. And then if I were to sit up to work at a computer, I might just do that with my spine. So my pelvis is still tipped back. What we want to do for maintaining the natural curves of the spine is bring the pelvis up. All right, so now I am not sitting, sorry for the noise, on the lower sacrum and the tailbone. I have shifted off of that and onto my sitting bones. So here I'm on my tailbone and the lower part of my sacrum, and now I'm rolling the pelvis up and onto the base of the sitting bones. Now, because I started in that slumped position, that I want to lay down position, my buttocks, the skin, the flesh are all heading towards my knees. So coming up like this is great, but it's even better if I can release the tissue, the soft tissue, in this direction. That helps to keep me upright. Now, if I were to stay here for very long, staying here is not going to be great because all the tissues start to dry out and I'm not hydrating my body. I'm also going to be getting a lot of tension in my hip flexor, the muscles that run across the front of the hip that are trying to keep my pelvis upright when I brought my leg this high up. So remember I was saying that the more this knee comes up, the more the thigh comes up, the more the pelvis will naturally tip back. So if I'm bringing my pelvis forward, there are muscles that are working overtime to try to maintain this. Many of us are going to feel it here in the hip flexors. Many of us are going to feel it here in the lower back and even in the mid back. All of these muscles working so hard to keep us upright. So we can do some things to create more ease, sukha in Sanskrit. And that would be to lift the hips higher than the knees, right? So if you are a shorter variety human being, this chair might work for you. I've actually met 2 people who are adults that these chairs work for. If you are any taller than that, you need to modify the chair. So I've got some blankets folded here, and I'm going to place a blanket on the seat of the chair. And you could do this with me. You can pause the video, go find some blankets. Already relief here. You can see my hip is starting to go a little higher than my knee. Now, I know plenty of people who are a lot taller than me, and they sit down in these chairs and they're like this. Their knees are higher than their hips. This is a disaster for them. But still this is not high enough. I'm going to take it higher. Just like Sly and the Family Stone will tell you, you gotta take it higher. So now my hips are higher than my knees. There's a lot more ease, and I could stay sitting for a while. So if I wanted to do a meditation practice here, or pranayama breathing practice, I could comfortably stay here for some time. Now, all of us should play around with taking it higher. It would really be great if you would give yourself the time to kind of play with this to see what's too high. Find too high, make it too high, and then say, okay, clearly that's not great, and I'm gonna lower it. So actually, 3 blankets, this feels pretty good. All right, so typically when I'm sitting, teaching a class, pranayama, or sitting at my computer, if I sit at my desk or at the dining room table, I have a support that is more like the 2 blankets here. But I'm finding, wow, 3 blankets. I thought I was going too high, and this actually feels really good. There's a lot of ease. And so I can maintain those natural vertebral column curves, which means all my bones fit together just the way they evolved to fit together, and all those discs sit in there, plump and perfect, in between those vertebrae, and they're not being pressed on toward the front or to the back or to the sides, depending on what I'm doing. They're sitting evenly in between each of their vertebrae. Now they're there for movement, so we are meant to move. The human body has evolved to move. We were big movers. Now we're big sitters. We're very sedentary as a culture compared to what the original humans must have been like, moving to get food and shelter and whatever they needed. So another thought here is to go ahead and play with that. Go too high, experience what it feels like to sit too low, which you've been doing that experiment most of your life. Play with this and see how that contributes to allowing for this nice, elongated, open front, open back, open sides in my posture. But I want to show you one other thing. So often if I'm sitting just a little bit lower, I will sometimes do this with a 3rd blanket, or maybe you could even do it with a towel. So this is just a simple hand towel. You could use a bath towel. And I'm creating this little roll. And where I'm going to put this is behind my sitting bones. Let's see if I can show this. And under my tailbone. All right, so out here would be the buttocks, right? And I'm not sitting on this. I'm bringing it behind the sitting bones and just kind of up underneath the tail. So a lot of people find this really, really helpful. So I come onto the support, and you can also notice I'm not sitting way back here. Okay, when I'm way back here, I've got these blankets under my thigh. It's pressing into my thigh and making my thigh go up. So I come forward in my chair. And if you're a server at a restaurant, I apologize. I'm that person who's like always with my chair sitting way back behind me as I sit. I'm kind of trying to adjust that chair to work for my body while I'm sitting at the table at the restaurant for a long period of time, for the period of time that I'm there. So this is behind my sitting bones, under my tail. So what I just did, leaning forward, like you're going to pick something up off the floor, place that little roll underneath, and then come up. So it's kind of tipping my buttocks upward, which is an extra support for my pelvis staying upright. And I can stay upright now. Now, I don't sit like this all the time. I just talked about sitting like this at a restaurant. I do tend to sit in chairs in daily life a little more upright than you might see typically with people. But I also slouch. I, crash back on my couch and watch a movie. But I also move, so I don't tend to stay in those positions. Staying creates dryness in the tissues, and it creates pressure and often shearing force in the discs And so moving and letting the body get hydrated, changing your position, is going to go a long way to keep you healthy. I just want to show this one little thing that I did with the towel, with the blanket. I will sometimes do that. And so then I'll sit on it and slide forward so the buttocks are tipped up. And I can maintain this nice elongated posture. So let's look at how to create that on the floor if you are somebody who sits on the floor for meditation. So there are so many different ways that we can prop ourselves up for a seated posture for meditation or pranayama. I am going to show it with a block. This is what I typically use. And blankets. So from the side, if I sit in Virasana on a block, I can do a pretty good job. I've got a level of flexibility in my legs and hips to sit in this upright posture with a well-aligned spine. So notice that I came forward, I lifted up my sitting bones and rolled back onto them. So the tailbone is out of the way. We are not sitting like this. All right, so here my sitting bones are underneath me, my tail is underneath me. I'm in flexion of the spine. This is not creating a sense of openness. It's not well aligned. It is flexion, and sometimes I want to do flexion, but not for meditation or breathing practice or even sitting, driving and watching TV or whatever I might be doing, having a conversation, because then you're going to lift your head up and create this forward head position. So just look at that transition there, just rolling the pelvis up. Okay, so that's the same if you were sitting. And I want to sit here because a lot of people will think, okay, I'm going to do sitting meditation. I'm going to sit on the floor. Notice that my knees are higher than my hips. Therefore, I have to work really hard to keep my pelvis upright. Already I've got, my hip flexors are overworking. And I won't really be able to let my mind dissolve into stillness. It won't be able to settle because these guys are screaming their heads off. And eventually, this is going to happen. And now I've collapsed in the front body, and then I'm probably going to lift my head up. And this just does not contribute to a meditative state. So, again, I would prop my hips up on something and let my knees drop lower than my hips. All right? This is a little bit lower than I normally sit. So I usually take a blanket. And notice I'm lifting my tail in the air, bringing that seat underneath me, and then coming upright. Oh, that's lovely. So now I'm very settled. It already starts to create that meditative state. So the mind is beginning to settle in. I have good alignment, front and back and sides, that allow the ribs to move, allow the breathing to happen. So I could do pranayama from here. And, of course, some of you will need to go higher, all right? And you know, there are other issues, like with the knees and the feet, that might need to be addressed, that are beyond the scope of this little video here. But the higher you go, the more of this angle you're going to get, right? The more the angle, the more ease. And I'll just show that in Virasana. So Virasana, and then I might lift up. Right, this also takes care of problems with too deep of an angle for people in their knees. I like Virasana, especially for beginners, because it really is much easier to get the pelvis in this upright posture, contributing to the natural curves of the spine. But it does sometimes give people problems with the knees and the feet. And there are things that you can do for that as well. So there you have it. How to sit without totally destroying your back. The key is maintain the natural curves of the spine by placing your pelvis in the upright position, taking into consideration this kinetic chain, that the spinal column and the pelvis work together, and when one part moves, another part is affected. So maintaining those natural curves, and not staying still for too long. So when you are finished with your meditation, when you're finished with your pranayama, when you're taking a break from your computer or your screen of whatever you're doing, even sitting and reading a book, take some time to move. Take little breaks, do little movements. I have a whole video about a little yoga sequence to do if you've been sitting too long. So check that out and enjoy your sitting, and remember to move. Namaste.